Hello everybody, it's Veda here, and today we're going to be benchmarking the GTX 1060 3GB edition of the graphics card with the Intel Core i7-4790K with 16GB of DDR3 1600MHz RAM. And the game that we're going to be benchmarking today is Sker Ritual, and it's basically like Call of Duty Zombies. I benchmarked it already with the 3060 Ti, and the VRAM usage was at like 4 to 5, sometimes even 6 gigs of VRAM usage. So I'm quite interested to see how the game performs on a much lower VRAM graphics card. So with that out of the way, let's jump on into the game and see what kind of performance we can expect. Alright, so to get us started, we're going to be playing at 1080p. I have the high preset enabled, but I'm going to go through and manually adjust some things because some of these settings on the high preset, which is the highest settings preset in the game, it's just basically some of the settings are not very good. So we're going to turn them off. So I'll take you through them one at a time. Dynamic resolution, we're going to turn that off so our resolution's not going all over the place. We're going to be playing with TAA. The only other resolution option that is true native is default, but I don't even know if that's true native or if it's reverting to FSR or AMD CAS. So to play it safe, we're going to use TAA. We've got texture quality on full, texture streaming is on, and yep, these are on the highest settings. We're going to turn off motion blur, of course, and we're going to turn off chromatic aberration. That can apply a really ugly effect. We're going to turn lens distortion off, film grain, I'm going to leave bloom on. This can be an ugly setting as well, but we're going to leave it on because I don't know exactly what it does in this game in terms of like if it makes the game look better or worse, so we'll just leave it as it is. And we're going to turn distortion off, blur off, and we'll leave everything else as is. So pretty much highest settings that have somewhat adjusted to look a bit better, basically. So let's jump on in and see what the performance is like. Alrighty, okay. It looks like I actually left on... there we go. Render scale is set to 5%, so let me just turn these back up. The render scale was at 5%. I was doing some testing earlier with the i7 with some overclocking, and so I was just testing out the performance in this game. But anyways, full resolution. I was wondering what was going on there. My game was so blurry, but yeah, as you can see here, 1080p using maximum settings, you're not really going to see 60 FPS. Which, that was a huge spike there on my first bullet. Did you see that? It's not exactly the smoothest here. We're at like mid 40s right now, but we are completely using all of our VRAM at the moment. All 3 gigs is being used in this game. The i7 is more than capable of playing this game at least at this FPS. We will test the i7 itself out later on, but yeah, 1080p ultra, all of the VRAM is being used. We're averaging around 50 FPS here, and sometimes it is obviously dropping into the mid 40s when there's quite a few enemies, and I'm sure if there's a bunch of particle effects, we're going to see even worse performance. It is nice to see though that for the RAM usage, we're not even using 9 gigs right now, so you can play this completely fine if you've got 16 gigs of RAM, which is nice to see. And even though we're underneath 60 FPS, I actually think this is pretty impressive considering it's a 1063 gigs. Like, this card is about 8 years old at this point, so the fact that a new game that just literally came out last month, it's been out for like 2 weeks, the fact that, you know, even some newer games that are coming out are completely fine with such old GPUs is nice to see, because a lot of the recent titles that have been coming out that are really popular have not been very good, basically, for performance. Even with new cards, they're performing really dreadfully. So it's nice to see that there are some game developers that are actually releasing games which, granted, it does not have the best graphics in the world, but I would rather have graphics that are not exactly the best if I can actually play the goddamn game. So with that, let's throw on FSR, because I know some people may want to see the FSR. We're still using all the ultra settings. We've got FSR 1.0, which is probably not great. We're going to leave the sharpness at default. We're just going to leave it as is. FSR 1. Now, something that really is really weird with the options in this game is, where is the FSR option? Like, it just says FSR 1. I don't see any option to actually adjust the FSR. So I've noticed there's an issue with the upscaling options in this game. There doesn't seem to be any menu to actually adjust the upscaling. So for example, I've got AMD FSR. It is 1.0, which is not great. I enabled it and there's no scaling option. AMD CAS, there's no scaling option. This texture quality and texture streaming, well, texture quality is an option that's already here but lower down. So there's actually no presets for these, and AMD FSR1, as I'll show you here, doesn't seem to do anything for me. As you see, we're at the same FPS. It hasn't applied any FSR. Very bizarre. Also, Nvidia DLSS didn't work with my RTX 3060 Ti. The DLSS did not work. I'm sure they'll fix these at some point, but I'm surprised the game's been out for 2 weeks and FSR seemingly is not working. Not like FSR1 is very good anyways. Let's see if AMD CAS is working. So I just enabled AMD CAS, and that's doing nothing. We're at the same FPS, and DLSS was doing nothing. Maybe I'm missing something. If I am, do let me know in the comments. By the way, dynamic render scale is something completely different. For those of you that are like, you have not turned that on, it's completely different. So yeah, it doesn't look like the upscalers are working. So we're just gonna have to stick with native resolution technically. Like technically I can lower the resolution myself by going here to render scale, but that's not FSR and that's not DLSS or anything like that, right? It's me just lowering the resolution myself with this scale or with this slider. So yeah, clearly at ultra 1080p, just underplayable essentially. So let's switch it to another preset. All right, so now we're at 1080p. We're using the medium preset, but again, we're going to go through and turn some of these settings off because it's re-enabled those awful settings, or some of the awful settings that you do not want. So dynamic render scale, turning that off. We're still using TAA because there's nothing else that you can really use at the moment. Texture quality, it's set that to full by default. 8 times now instead of 16 times. Shadows are still on. Medium motion blur, that's going off. Chromatic aberration, that's going off. Lens distortion, I'm turning that off. Film grain, nope. Bloom, yep, we'll leave these on. Contact shadows, I've gone down to low. Distortion, I don't want that. I don't want blur. And let's have a look at this now. It's actually turned low res transparency on, so I'm not exactly sure what that does in this game, but it's turned those on by default. So let's have a look at the FPS on the medium preset 1080p. And actually, it doesn't look like it's given us all that much FPS. Going from pretty much maximum to medium hasn't done a whole lot. And I feel like it's kind of because a lot of the settings anyways, I did turn off, but a lot of the settings like blur and motion blur should not have any performance impact. Stuff like that should not have performance impact anyways. So, you know, even though I turn them off, it shouldn't matter essentially. And you're not going to want to play with them on. But it did turn a lot of the shadows down and stuff, but yet performance didn't increase that much here. VRAM usage has gone down. We're at 2.8 gigs, so that's nice to see. We're no longer like completely maxed out. I would say this is playable for quite a few people. Yeah, still obviously completely bottlenecked by the 1060 here, but it's not like it's terrible FPS. It's 60 frames in a Call of Duty game. So yeah, even at medium settings at 1080p, still around 60 FPS, playable for a lot of people, but maybe you play at a higher refresh rate. Let's see what we can get for you guys on higher refresh rates, right? All right, so now we're at 1080p. We are using the very low preset, but for some reason, there's still some settings that we need to turn off, which it turns on, which I really feel like it should not. So dynamic render scale, that's getting turned off. We've got texture quality at quarter now. And all of these settings are off. Nice to see. Bloom is still on low, so we'll turn that completely off. And we have low res transparency, which does increase performance, so we'll leave that on. Blur is enabled by default, we'll turn that off, and we'll turn volumetric fog off. Now for me, when I benchmarked my 3060 Ti using 1080p lowest settings with volumetric fog turned on the lowest settings, I was getting around 260, 270 FPS, but when I turned it off, I then got up to like 290, 300 FPS, so it actually had about 10% impact on the performance. It does make the game look a lot better, but about 10% FPS loss there. You see this difference? I'll quickly. Yeah, you see that? It makes a pretty big difference, but you'll lose about 10% of your frames. We'll actually see if it's 10% in this as well. So just look at the FPS counter, because it still applies in this menu system. So we're at about 86, 87. If I turn it on, yeah, 76. It's actually more than 10% FPS loss here, but it's up to you if you want to use that or not. But let's jump in and see what the averages are like. Alright, so the game obviously looks pretty abysmal at lowest settings, especially at 1080p. Does not look particularly good. And we're actually CPU bound here quite a few times. at around 80 something FPS. Oh my god, I'm getting slashed. So VRAM usage has actually dropped down to 2.6 gigs here now. I'm surprised this gun is still killing things as easy as it is. It's like, it's pretty much an M14, isn't it? Only it costs triple the price in this game. We're getting around averages of 85 FPS here, and most of the time we are GPU bound, so yeah, it looks like you're not going to be hitting that 100 FPS range in this game, which if you are somebody who plays at high refresh rate, you're going to need to get a better GPU and a better CPU, of course. So with that, let's go ahead and test the CPU by itself, because yeah, why not? So to test the CPU without the GPU bottlenecking us, I'm just going to play at 720p resolution instead, since the upscalers aren't working, and I'm still using the lowest settings in the game, as you can see. So the game is going to look absolutely horrendous. So don't pay attention to how the game looks. This is purely to see what the CPU is capable of. So let's jump back in. Yeah, this does not look fantastic, but it's not the point of this part of the benchmark. It's simply to see what the CPU can push if you have a stronger GPU, of course. But yeah, it looks like the CPU is actually capable of getting around 100 frames, which is pretty crazy actually. It is dropping though, like sometimes it does drop down to like 60s, high 60s. 1% lows are about 55 60 FPS right now. Yeah, the averages sit around 95, but realistically I am seeing a lot of 85 FPS range, so we'll let this play out. It's not exactly terrible FPS. We're getting like 80, 85 FPS when all these enemies are alive here in the middle. Oh, hello. I've got infinite ammo for a little bit, but I can't see him because the resolution is so small. I can barely see this guy. Oh my god. Ooh, big spike. Where's my... I just used a poison ability, but I didn't see it. Like, I don't know if it's because my settings are too low. I can't see my own poison effect. I've never used it before, but yeah, it looks like you're going to get around 80 to 90 FPS on average using this CPU. But most likely, most of you guys are here for the 1060, right? But it's still interesting to see what the CPU is capable of. And I don't think it's necessarily I don't think it's a bad experience. 70 something FPS with the CPU. You know, considering how old the CPU is, I think it's actually pretty respectable in all honesty. Oh, big spike when we killed him. It's not really what you want. But yeah, let's try 1440p now. And just kind of see what that's like on lowest settings. We're not going to try at medium or anything, we'll just try lowest. Alright, so now we're at 1440p. We are using the lowest settings in the game. It says custom, because I've obviously manually adjusted all of the settings to actually be at the lowest. So yeah, those are the lowest settings. Let's see the performance that we're going to get here. Alright, so it doesn't look great yet. Game still looks pretty horrendous. Now, I don't know why, but it seems like the game has some sort of internal blurring. Even if you turn blurring off, it's probably just the TAA, right? But I don't know. The game is very, very dark, and it's very, very blurry. Even for me, so I'm not sure what that's about. But as you can see here at 1440p, we're getting around 60 FPS when there's not too many enemies. Now let me just kill that to get the round started. Yeah, take one of these and take some damage over time. It's very little damage over time, but it's damage. Wow, don't look at my accuracy, guys. Can I kill you? I'm gonna be out of ammo before this guy dies. Yeah, let's go buy another gun. Oh man, I don't think anybody's playing at 1440p with a 1060, especially a 3 gig version of the card. But I just wanted to kind of see what this would be like, you know, if for whatever reason you decided, hey, I'm gonna play at 1440p with a 1060. What is this? Sudden death? Oh, it's like insta-kill. Well, it's not like insta-kill, it literally is insta-kill. I wonder if this will insta-kill you guys. It's technical damage. Yeah, it does. My AoE damage from my elixir insta-kills them. That's actually kind of an OP combo. Not bad. Makes me invulnerable. Pretty much. There we go. Round 12. Easy as that, guys. Game is super blurry, though. I don't know if you can tell this. And YouTube will butcher this even more, so that's going to be amazing to see on YouTube. Roughly 60 FPS on average here. 1440p. With a little bit of VRAM left, just a smudge of VRAM, and the i7 still capable of playing a game like this at just under 100 FPS, like 80, 90 FPS on average with the i7. Like, it's kind of insane. It's only using 8 gigs of RAM right now to actually play the game too. So, I mean, I'm really impressed with the game's performance. I'm not sure why people have been having performance issues with this game. I have seen, you know, like negative reviews and stuff, people complaining about the performance. And I don't know why. Because I'm playing it here on a 10-year-old CPU and an 8-year-old GPU with 3 gigs of VRAM and 16 gigs of DDR3 RAM. DDR3 RAM at 1600 megahertz. And while it's not exactly really high FPS, I'm at 1440p and I'm at 60 FPS. Yes, I'm on lowest settings, so the game doesn't necessarily look that good, but it's playable. So I don't know why people are having issues with performance, but yeah, that's going to do it for today's video on this game. If you found any use out of this, please do leave me a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave me a comment suggesting a game that you'd like me to benchmark, and I've been Verda. Take care of yourselves, guys. Until next time, bye-bye for now.